It is the news story. President Trump just can't seem to escape week over week. We're talking, of course, about Epstein.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable.
Yes, people are still talking about that guy. And they're talking about Trump's connection to him, too.
Now, some of President Trump's far-right allies are frustrated that the administration appears to be ready to move on from the Epstein investigation.
The Trump administration officials had promised to reveal what many of his conspiracy-minded supporters said was the truth about Epstein's death, that he was murdered so he wouldn't implicate powerful people at his trial. Another example, they said, of the corrupt deep state.
Why would Donald Trump be so circumspect about exposing the secrets of Jeffrey Epstein, a billionaire child sex trafficker who died in prison, without revealing which of his well-connected elite friends knew about and possibly even participated in his revolting and illegal activities?
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
All right.
I guess I would. I think that less so because, you don't know. You don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there because there's a lot of phony stuff with that whole world.
I'm Gwen McClure, and today on The Detail, the chaotic, dramatic, ongoing saga of Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and the fallout that Trump's waffling on the issue has had on his supporters.
Those who are more conspiracy-minded have a lot to chew on because they keep either making sloppy statements or inconsistent statements or riling up their base and then yanking the rug back. So it's sort of a roller coaster ride for the MAGA base.
That's Jay Kuo. He's a former attorney based in New York, and he writes a political and legal newsletter called The Status Quo. Most people will know the name Jeffrey Epstein. He was an American financier with connections to wealthy and powerful people, Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, and current U.S. President Donald Trump. You don't have to look hard to find pictures of the two together. They allegedly had a falling out in the early 2000s, though, and hadn't spoken for years before Epstein's arrest in 2019.
And depending on who you believe, the falling out was either over a real estate deal that they both wanted, that's Jeffrey Epstein's version of it, or, as Trump recently has said, it was over Jeffrey Epstein poaching employees from Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, he took people, and because he took people, I said, don't do it anymore. They work for me. And he took, beyond that, he took some others. And once he did that, that was the end of him. I didn't like, when they steal people, I don't like it.
And then when asked more specifically about that, he said that Jeffrey Epstein took employees or stole employees, interesting use of the word, employees from the spa at Mar-a-Lago.
Did one of those stolen, persons, that include Virginia Giuffre?
I don't know. I think she worked at the spa. I think so. I think that was one of the people. He stole her. And by the way, she had no complaints about us, as you know. None whatsoever.
Mar-a-Lago is Trump's Florida resort. And the employee they're talking about there is Virginia Giuffre, who was one of the most outspoken accusers of Epstein. Epstein was charged with sex trafficking of minors in July 2019. That August, he died in prison. The FBI said it was by suicide, but conspiracy theorists had other ideas, which Trump himself supported. This is from shortly after Epstein died.
Says the White House on Jeffrey Epstein, forget the guessing game on what happened Friday night. Focus instead on the crimes he's accused of committing.
I think the president just wants everything to be investigated. Jeffrey Epstein has done some very bad things over a number of years. And so let's continue to investigate that.
And yet, it was Kellyanne Conway's own boss, the U.S. president, seen here with Epstein in '92, who this weekend helped feed the fast-growing conspiracy theories on how it is that Epstein apparently killed himself while in his cell in this high-security jail in New York. The suggestion in a retweet by Trump that somehow Bill Clinton was involved, a theory for which there is zero evidence. Trump sent it to his 63 million followers regardless.
It's really hard to believe that with the Trump DOJ in charge, that somehow the Clintons got to, with their mysterious power base, got to Jeffrey Epstein and murdered him in his prison cell. But this was the conspiracy that the Trump team, including Don Jr. and others, fueled. And they would suggest that the suicide that was somehow not to be believed for what it was. And people like Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, who are now number 1 and number 2 at the FBI, they made their living off of pushing these conspiracies about Jeffrey Epstein not really dying by suicide, that there actually is a cabal of satanic pedophiles in the Democratic Party.
FBI Director Kash Patel and Deputy Director Dan Bongino, before they joined the Bureau, alleged cover-ups and corruption in the incarceration death of Epstein, a convicted sex trafficker.
Epstein died 6 years ago, but the mystery surrounding his death and exactly who is on his client list has kept his name in the headlines and on late-night comedy shows.
Well, let's begin tonight with a young man by the name of Donald Aloysius Trump. As you know, this young man has been embroiled in the Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking scandal and did what anybody who is innocent when facing an accusation of this type, did what anybody who was innocent would do. He fled the country.
Last week, Trump was in Scotland to sign a trade deal with the EU, and he was asked the question,
Mr. President, was part of the rush to get this deal done to knock the Jeffrey Epstein story out?
Oh, you got to be kidding with that.
But Trump isn't helping himself.
Those files were run by the worst scum on earth. If they had something, they would have released. Now, they can easily put something in the files that's a phony.
Which is why I can't release it. It's simple. If I, Donald Trump, was in the files, they would have released it. So clearly I'm not in the files, but of course, I'm clearly in the files.
What are the Epstein files?
That's a very interesting question because there are obviously documents. They say, 5 terabytes of documents, which is something like 1.5 million pages. But a lot of that is just in electronic form and has to be sort of reviewed electronically as scanned documents. It also is a trove of video evidence that they obtained from Epstein's residences. And it's still unclear exactly what is on those video files. So if you were to believe Pam Bondi
is the U.S. Attorney General.
She says that those files only contain Jeffrey Epstein himself and a bunch of victims and child pornography, and therefore none of it can be released. That seems a little bit inconsistent with the idea that when the police came and raided his properties, they found evidence of recording equipment that is no longer there. And so it seems likely that Jeffrey Epstein was making live recordings, and we still just don't know. That kind of level of stuff is sort of only known by some of the top prosecutors and the people on the cases, and of course the witnesses themselves, one of whom is now dead.
So Pam Bondi said back in February of this year that she had all these Epstein files, quote, sitting on her desk.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients? Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump.
And that she was going to release them. And then did she? What happened there?
Yes, and the way she did it actually made everything much worse because she decided she was going to have an initial release of files, but she was going to give it to 15 right-wing influencers. They got these binders that basically contained no new public information. And so once they got these binders and they were really trumpeting the fact that they were sort of on the inside of this and they were going to expose the pedophiles once and for all, once they sort of flipped through the binders, they realized, hey, there's nothing new in here. And so they put a lot of pressure on Pam Bondi, asking, where's the rest of it? She fires off a letter to Kash Patel, the FBI, saying, I know there's more, get me more. And she talks about, client lists. So this is curious because she's now saying there is no client list, but I think the very next day, on the 28th of February, she sent a letter to Kash Patel demanding client lists that she knew existed. And so someone's lying.
Kash Patel is the director of the FBI. He was just here in New Zealand to open an office in Wellington. He's a Trump man through and through. But before his appointment, he was basically part of a group of professional conspiracy theorists. He and his now deputy FBI chief, Dan Bongino, spent years on podcasts and TV appearances making insinuations about who was on the Epstein client list, demanding its release, and even suggesting that the Biden administration was withholding documents because they were protecting high-powered Democrats on it. The MAGA movement became obsessed with the files. QAnon used them to push ideas about a deep state cover-up of a network of global pedophiles. On the election trail, Trump repeatedly said that he would declassify them.
And once they're in power, they're going to expose all these people and bring them down. And so that was the thing they said for years and years and years. And they made a lot of money saying that. And that's why it's really interesting now that they find themselves in the position they have to disown a lot of that. And it puts them in a very tough spot vis-a-vis their original audience.
Did Jeffrey Epstein hang himself or did somebody kill him?
Senator, I believe he hung himself in a cell in the Metropolitan Detention Center.
Are you going to release all the information about that?
Senator, we are working through that right now with the Department of Justice.
When do you think you'll have it done, Cash?
I think in the near future, sir.
Like before I die?
Trump's people are now saying there's no incriminating list, no evidence that Epstein blackmailed powerful figures. It was suicide, not murder. Basically, nothing to see here.
The Department of Justice released a widely anticipated memo detailing the findings of Jeffrey Epstein's 2019 death. The report ruled out any foul play, confirming Epstein died by suicide, and found no evidence that he kept a client list to incriminate those involved in his sex trafficking ring.
And Trump says the files were a hoax.
There was supposed to be another big dump of documents once the FBI's files came over. And what happened, about 1,000 FBI agents were pulled from other cases and assigned to comb through all of these documents, looking for any evidence of Trump's name. If that's not evidence of guilt, consciousness of guilt, I don't know what is. Because they had one purpose in all of this, which is to make sure that the president did not look bad. And instead what they discovered was enough to fill some indices of instances where Trump's name appears in these files. And so that was enough in turn to get Democrats and Republicans to agree that the files have to be released to the public. What's interesting is the idea that the MAGA people have never put two and two together, that Trump's name appears in the Epstein files, for example, on the flight logs. I believe it's 8 times. So, often you'll see MAGA people asking on X, asking Grok, which is Elon's AI, is this true? And because they have not heard of it, it's in such an information bubble that they think the only people who are in the Epstein files are the Clintons and Bill Gates and a lot of Democratic officials, Bill Richardson, but they'll never go as far as to say that their dear leader may be in the files, when in fact it's very clear that he is.
How serious is this for Trump politically? I mean, do you think this is going to be the thing that finally unravels his base, or is it just another, small bump in the road?
I think everyone is cautious to say this is going to be the thing, because we've said that many times in the past and been wrong. What we do know is that this is the longest lasting scandal. And it's not going away. In fact, Trump is creating a lot of unforced errors that is keeping it top of the news. I can give you a few examples for, when the Wall Street Journal came out with this explosive allegation of a book, birthday book, leather-bound 50th birthday book that Jeffrey Epstein's friends had all put together, and that Trump's letter was inside of it.
The outlet reported that he wrote a message in a birthday card to Jeffrey Epstein.
When reporters from the Wall Street Journal were reporting out their story about a quote-unquote bawdy birthday message that Donald Trump allegedly sent to Jeffrey Epstein in 2003, they got the following on-the-record quote from Trump that said in part, "I never wrote a picture in my life."
I don't do drawings. I'm not a drawing person. Sometimes people say, would you draw a building? And I'll draw 4 lines and a little roof, for a charity stuff. But I'm not a drawing person. I don't do drawings of women, that I can tell you.
Trump decided he was going to file a federal lawsuit for $10 billion against the Wall Street Journal. Well, a lawsuit, when you file something that big, it has many parts to it. It has depositions of both sides. It has, discovery. It has subpoenas. And so every time when you've got a separate case within a case, that just will keep it at the top of the news. And so you were hearing now about Murdoch's deposition, and people are wondering when Trump is going to be deposed. And now he's denied that he even wrote that letter. Well, that's funny because the Epstein estate has a copy of that book. And so is it going to get subpoenaed? And who can testify as to the veracity and the chain of custody of that book? Someone like Ghislaine Maxwell, which is probably why they're busy talking to her right now, saying, what do you remember about this book? Wink, wink, right? Not much, do you?
Maxwell's meeting with President Trump's Deputy Attorney General and former criminal defense attorney Todd Blanche wrapping up just moments ago. She's the Epstein co-conspirator in prison for her role in enticing and recruiting underage girls.
Is there any legitimate reason that you can see why they would be talking to Ghislaine Maxwell right now?
Legitimate reason, no. It's improper on a number of levels. Todd Blanche was the personal attorney for Trump before he was placed into the Attorney General's office. For him to go in as a big conflict of interest, we don't know if he's serving the president or serving the people at this point. Dangling the idea of a pardon is completely inappropriate because it encourages her to commit perjury or to misremember things in order to gain leniency. And so they're trying to get out ahead of whatever she knows. And that just stinks. And I think that it's backfiring a bit with the base because the base knows that there's also no legitimate reason to go talk to Maxwell when you haven't even talked to any of the victims.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit more about these Wall Street Journal articles. Tell me about what they said and kind of what the fallout has been.
Sure. The first one was a bombshell, as we discussed, about the leather-bound 50th birthday book, in which there is a letter from Donald Trump where he uses some really interesting language. He says things like enigmas never age. He says that they've got a wonderful secret. And so it certainly raises more questions than it answers. Trump immediately disclaimed it, saying he doesn't talk like that. But of course, the internet went to work immediately. And I could remember him using the word enigma to describe Ben Carson in 2015 during the presidential campaign, because he used it almost like a play on words of the N-word.
Now, Carson's an enigma to me. I didn't say it.
And so that's why it stuck in my head. But immediately I thought, oh, enigma. I've heard him use that word before. So for him to say, I don't talk like that, it's immediately disprovable. And so I think that gets into why people start to have doubts. Mm-hmm. The second big report was the Wall Street Journal reported that Trump was told by Pam Bondi back in May that his name was in the files. And then shortly after that, he agreed that they could basically close down the investigations and say there was no client list, and agreed that this was going to be the end of the road for the Epstein matter. The problem with this is that his story, again, has changed. At first, he said that Pam Bondi only briefed him about some other matters and that she didn't tell him in the briefing that he was in the files. And then to another reporter, I believe about a week later, he said that she never briefed him at all. His story keeps changing. In this case, though, he's lying to his base, the base that trusted him. He was supposed to bring the storm. That's the QAnon thing, that he had even reposted pictures of him bringing the storm, and getting all the QAnon folks riled up, that he was going to come in, sweep out government and drain the swamp and then arrest all these Democrat satanic pedophiles. It's absurd on its face, but a good percentage of the American public actually is QAnon believing or QAnon adjacent. Sadly, it's around 20%.
Wow.
The danger he faces is that he runs the risk of having this very, very emotionally charged, sort of imbalanced group of folks coming after him now for having failed them, made false promises to them. And the vitriol online and the disappointment and the outrage is like nothing, the GOP has ever seen.
Well, and there's some significance to that these two articles came out in the Wall Street Journal, right?
Absolutely. Makes you wonder who is sourcing these two, that paper, because sometimes a source can get to choose which paper they go to. Because obviously if they got to the New Republic or even the Atlantic or the Times, that maybe the MAGA people would have been able to ignore it more. But because it comes from Rupert Murdoch's paper, they have to, again, now say Rupert Murdoch is somehow a rhino. But this is the same company that runs Fox News.
What is a rhino?
Republican in name only.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess for our listeners who aren't familiar with the Wall Street Journal, I think a lot of people will be, but for those who aren't, it's traditionally a really conservative, Republican-leaning paper.
Yes, and it's gotten more so lately. The opinion pages on the Wall Street Journal are quite right-wing.
There's something a little bit weird to me about the fact that the Democrats so badly want these files released, but these surely have information about victims, right? I mean, is this the usual way that this would play out, do you think, if there weren't all this political stuff involved?
Well, the usual way it would play out is when there's an ongoing case, and there still was an ongoing criminal case because Maxwell's case was still on appeal, those files usually stay sealed, and it's up to the courts to unseal them upon request. And normally they would not. Now, the FBI or the DOJ could release them, but for what purpose? They wouldn't do it for any political purpose. So under the Biden administration, when you're playing by the rules, these sort of things just wouldn't come out. Biden would have a wall between him and the prosecutors. He wouldn't know what's in the files. He wouldn't try to find out what's in the files. And so when they say, well, why didn't the Democrats release these if Trump's name's all over them? It's like, Biden probably didn't know necessarily that Trump's name was all over this because he would keep an ethical wall between himself and the Department of Justice.
Right,
That's the way things are supposed to be done. So they don't understand because they don't play by the same rules. They just assume that we would always do the wrong thing in order to advance ourselves politically. But that's not actually how the world is supposed to work, and that's not how Biden, ran his administration, nor how Merrick Garland ran the DOJ. Now, fast forward, you've got no wall between Bondi and Trump. She's basically doing his bidding, so much so that they're just trying to find every instance where his name shows up and somehow flag it to make sure that it doesn't come out. Well, it's probably coming out.
If you want to keep following the story, Jay's Substack is status quo, quo is spelled K-U-O, .substack.com. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thanks to Jay Quo for talking. This episode was engineered by Mark Chesterman and produced by Alexia Russell and Davina Zimmer. I'm Gwen McClure. Ka kite ano.